honestly feels like it was just yesterday, I could tell how successful you were going to be. And I know you don't like to brag, but you've been like #1 guy at Henry Schein on the equipment side for like how many years running now?
Well, chasing #1.
Doing a startup is less risky than doing an acquisition. And
It's really about, what type of practice do you want to run? That leads into, the type of patients you want to see.
yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I would tell all the doctors who are listening, if you're going to do this, right, please don't tell the landlord you're doing these test fit studies, right? Just kind of keep it under wraps, because the more you tell them you're invested in their space, the more excited the landlord gets and the less willing they are to negotiate. Hello and welcome back to Ali Off the Record. I'm your host, Ali Urumchian, and today's guest is someone who plays a critical role in helping doctors bring their dream practices to life. Joining me is Kevin McBee. He's an equipment sales specialist with Henry Schein, that is the largest dental supply and equipment distributor in North America. Now, for over a decade, Kevin has partnered with dentists, their architects, and contractors across the Bay Area to design and equip and expand their practices in order to maximize the efficiencies, boost production, and elevate the entire patient experience. Now, Kevin has guided countless startups and remodels through the process of turning vision into a functional and thriving practice. In this episode, we're going to dig into equipment trends that are shaping the industry, what startups should prioritize when building from scratch, and then the design strategies that make a practice not only efficient, but also unforgettable for the patients. You're not going to want to miss this. All right, Kevin, thanks for being on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thanks, Ali. Appreciate it. I've been looking forward to it, and love the people you've had on so far. Honored to be invited.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's funny, when you first started in this role, which honestly feels like it was just yesterday, I could tell how successful you were going to be. And I know you don't like to brag, but you've been like #1 guy at Henry Schein on the equipment side for like how many years running now?
Well, chasing #1. I got to give respect to Mike Molenbach out in Wisconsin. Shout out Mike if you turn into this. He's a beast. But yeah, I've been blessed to be in the top 3 for many years now. I've been doing this for just over a decade. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think makes you special is you take a client-centric approach, which is so important for our doctors who are doing de novo practices, because it's such a stressful time for them. When I first started, Kevin, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you. When I first started 20 years ago, it was totally different. There were probably 2 to 3 startups for every acquisition.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And so like the world has totally flipped, and now we're seeing a lot more, acquisitions than startups. But when people are finally ready to do their startup, it's because they've been looking for a practice for a long time. They haven't found it, right? And they're like, I give up. I want to build the practice of my dreams. And that's where you come in. And I think having a client-centric approach is so important in that regard.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think it's based a little bit off geography, that acquisition versus startup mix, but there's also a complete lack of education out there on the startup process, which is what I love what you're doing with this podcast to help educate people, because you and I know we've done these startup events locally before in our market, and most people are like, all I've ever heard about, and everybody that ever came and talked to us in school was about the acquisition route. So it's great to be an educator on the subject. And yeah. I mean, there are a lot of doctors, they look for the right acquisition for a while, and they eventually, there's, something wrong with the paint. There's, the operatory equipment or a size is too small. There's always something with it. And they're like, you know what? Screw this. Why don't I just, build my dream practice?
That's right. And, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I actually think doing a startup is less risky than doing an acquisition. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But there's a whole kind of theory that I have around this that we've seen kind of play out. But let's talk about you for a second. So you've got a doctor who wants to do a startup. They want to do their first practice. Okay. And they've reached out to you and they're like, Kevin, where do I start? Right? How do I get going? So walk us through what a doctor should start to think about as they're kind of getting started with this process. What do you want them to start doing?
Yeah, great question. I mean, if it's that early on, and we're just talking to them, they're like, hey, this is the very beginning. It's really about, what type of practice do you want to run? That leads into, the type of patients you want to see. So where do you want to open? Like, what demographics do we want to focus on in that area? And is this an area where you're comfortable living and being invested in the community? Because I really think it's great for startup practices to live in where they start their practice. So you're invested in the community, and in sales, we call it like we work our powerhouse, our contacts most close to us, the neighbors and friends we're surrounded by. So starting with vision and where you want to be. And then of course you need to go have a preliminary, discussion with a startup lender to make sure you'll qualify for the startup loan. And then what we'll do is we'll help shape, based off where they want to be. They go and have the conversations to make sure they can get approved to do the startup. We'll help shape is on the equipment and design side, how large of a space they need to look for based off the number of operatories they want to have equipped one day.
Yeah. And that's a really important part of this conversation because there's, if someone doesn't have that vision or haven't really thought about what kind of practice they want, then they can waste a lot of time looking for spaces that may not be a fit or looking for spaces that are in the wrong locations. Do you see that a lot? Or do you feel like that doesn't happen?
Absolutely. Being more pointed on where you want to be is definitely going to help speed up the process. And then having a preliminary discussion with an equipment, qualified equipment company and distributor that can help guide you on. And of course, being partnered with dental specific brokers is important because if you want a 8 operatory practice or 6 operatory practice, but we're looking at 1,600 square foot spaces, somebody needs to tell you early on so you're not spinning your wheels that that'll never work with the vision that you're saying you want as far as number of operatories equipped.
Yeah. So is there a number, Kevin, that applies there? Like, is there a certain number of operatories per square foot that somebody should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, and it varies based off specialty, right? So I'm glad you asked, and this is an important note to take, is in general practices, so GP startup, we say take the number of operatories desired, multiply that between 400 and 450 square feet. I use that variable because in the Bay Area, Northern California, where I am, space is tight, overhead is higher because rents are higher. We gear more towards that 400 a square foot per operatory desired is the total amount of square footage you should be looking for. But as you get to more rural areas, that 450 is a better number. And then for pediatric ortho, we say 300 to 350, times the number of operatories you desire is the total amount of square footage you should look for. And this is, that metric is giving allocations and assumptions based off you're going to have a, decent sized waiting room, a front desk for 2 to 3 people, staff lounge, things like that. So all of that is included in that calculation.
Yeah, awesome. Do you see doctors kind of going away from a private office in their locations, or are they still putting private offices in there for themselves?
We are still seeing private offices. What we're seeing less of, Ali, is we're seeing less consult rooms.
Oh.
Depending on the practice, but general family practices, I'm seeing a trend in designing more acoustic friendly private style operatories where consultation and reappointing can all take place chairside. So I'm seeing less consultation rooms for doctors, but definitely still private offices, typically with a workstation for an associate or a kid to be able to do some homework with them there, or to conduct a private interview or, HR type review.
Yeah. No, that's smart. No, that makes sense. I mean, that square footage is probably, what do you think a private consult room usually takes up in terms of floor space?
Probably anywhere from 25 to 40 square feet. The
Yeah.
smallest side would probably be 5 by 5. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good amount of space that they can use for something else for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in other space, if we can work on the front end with the lender to help get mechanical room, not with the lender, with the broker to help negotiate having mechanicals outside the space as well, or in a shared utility area, that's another 40 square feet we can allocate outside the space to maximize your number of operatories or other things you want to prioritize in your floor plan.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So, okay, so you've got a doctor, you've talked to them about their vision, what they want, they're starting to think about location. You and I did that bus tour, a couple of weeks ago, and we were asking some of the doctors about, locations, and one of them said the entire Bay Area, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like that's just too big of a zone." And by the time we were done, she had like, narrowed it down to a certain part of the peninsula, which was nice, but it was, they sometimes have these, they're not necessarily focused on one area. And I have found that getting the commercial broker who specializes in healthcare, tied in with them and working closely with you is a vital part of that discussion, because, the brokers find the physical space, but just because a space is good doesn't necessarily mean it works for your purposes, right? And so tell me about that relationship, between you and the brokers.
Yeah, I mean, I love what, one of our partners, realty partners says is, demographics isn't everything. Sometimes it is based off market opportunity. Maybe you're in an area where everybody's moved to fee for service, and now there's an opportunity to come in there and accept all insurances as a startup. That's a huge way to make sure to fill those chairs, very quickly. So demographics aren't everything. And I would also, say that not everything, it does play an important role. And there's companies that can help you, do demographics reports, but sometimes you got to focus on market opportunity. And I think we're in Northern California, but I think every market has a different opportunity where that might become more important. But where the broker and I partner up is, hey, Kevin, we've looked at, 4 spaces. We've narrowed it down to these 2. Here's the existing blueprints of this space. Can doctor fit her vision in there? And then I would have a vision meeting with the doctor to run through how many operatories, they want, and the other things that go along with the dental office, and make sure that can fit via what we call a test fit design plan.
Yeah. So walk me through that. What is a test fit design plan?
Yeah, so a test fit design plan is basically a dollhouse view of your floor plan. So we'll sit down, early on. This is usually one of our, if we've had that vision meeting, this might be our second meeting, because really after we set the parameters of how many square feet you need to look for, our next meeting is typically you found with your real estate broker and identified a space or a couple spaces you're highly interested in, and you think the economics of the lease can work there. And then we'll go through a, hour-long call where we're going through how many seats do we want in the front desk? How many in the waiting room? Do we want a consultation, or do we want to prioritize square footage elsewhere? How many operatories do we want? Do we need specialty suites or room for these areas? So it's a very detailed checklist specific to dental practices, and even more specific, it goes into each specialty to make sure within 5 days, and this is why I think brokers love partnering with us, is within 5 days, we'll get that test fit plan back to say, hey, here's this space versus this space. And sometimes that can be very helpful to decide on which space you're going to focus on.
Wow, that's incredible. 5 days is nothing. Kevin, are you doing that yourself, or are you sending that in-house to Shine, or like, what's the mechanics of that?
Yeah, great question. The design planning guide meeting is just me and the doctor, a consult meeting, a design consult meeting, if you will, where we are building your wish list. And then in collaboration with my in-house designer, we have about, I would say, like 20 employed interior designers at Shine that are working on floor plans in partnership with us based off our meeting with the doctor. And this is great because checks and balances too. Let's say we end up moving forward with that space. Our same design department is going to check the, equipment specification and MEP plans that the architect is going to need. They're going to help develop those, and they even have a plan checker review what they've done. So you've got a lot of checks and balances and a lot of specialists, behind you.
Yeah, no, you know what? I love that you mentioned that, because when my wife did her first office, and as you know, she's a pediatric dentist, the flow was you walked in and you walked out of the same area. And so as her practice grew, that became kind of a bottleneck, right? That became a bottleneck. But the architect who had first done that, it was his first real office. And so he hadn't really thought through the whole flow, and then when she outgrew that space and had to move to another location, the second time around, it was like all about the flow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was like you walk in one way, you walk out another way. And so that, there isn't that bottleneck and that congestion. And, those are the kind of things I feel like from an experience perspective, you and your team, can bring for a young doctor who's not thinking about that because they're so worried about so many other things that they're really relying on you for that floor plan and that design because you're thinking about things that they would never think about, right, in terms of their office.
Yes. And I mean, there's an old adage, if you will, in the equipment and design and dental design world that form follows function. We should focus on function first and then come in and make it then to your design look beautiful and create the wow environment. But it should function in a way that is efficient, a way that reduces steps for staff. We don't have, patients walking past private offices and staff lounges to get to clinical. There's things that go into play with dental offices when it comes to zoning, function, and flow that it's important to have an expert leading that discussion.
Yeah. And I think it's really nice that you do that for different locations so the doctor can kind of see what's out there and which one fits best for them because, the location might be awesome, but then like you said, the floor plan and whatnot may not be because they may not be able to have a second door and things of that nature.
Yeah.
It's
come up a lot where, hey, I've been looking for a while for a space, but it's only 1,200 square feet and I want 4 operatories. Like, Kevin, let's do a plan that shows it. And it doesn't mean that my metric is like the end all be all. It doesn't mean you can't fit 4 ops in 1,200 square feet, but there's concessions that we then have to have a discussion about, like potentially losing a private office or dramatically reducing staff lounge to make those things work. But that's where having a partner that can generate these test fit floor plans for you when you have a space you're serious about can be extremely beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I would, tell all the doctors who are listening, if you're going to do this, right, please don't tell the landlord you're doing these test fit studies, right? Just kind of keep it under wraps because the more you tell them you're invested in their space, the more excited the landlord gets and the less willing they are to negotiate. So we always say, do this stuff, but do it on the back end. Don't necessarily tell them what you're doing so the landlord doesn't see how excited you are for this space because we still want to negotiate with them. So
great point. Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to affect your posturing with the lease negotiations, and a good real estate broker will know to get these things for us without, tipping the hat.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about mistakes that you sometimes see a young doctor make in terms of equipment or design. You and I, have been to the ADEC, factory in Oregon, which is pretty incredible experience. If anybody hasn't had a chance to go check it out yet, you got to go do it. It's just incredible. But one thing that I learned is that a big part of, the equipment and the design of the floor plan of the office, really, the difference between a really good office and one that maybe doesn't operate as well, it's not like the big things that we sometimes worry about. It's kind of the little things that, can pop up that the doctors don't think about. What's one or two of the biggest mistakes that you're seeing right now, Kevin, that young doctors are making in terms of their designs?
Not enough storage and definitely not enough storage. I've never had an office say, man, one thing I regret about this office is I gave myself too much storage. And in combined equipment and lab, or just, maybe it's not combined, but that lab space, they're like, oh, I'm digital. I don't need a large lab.
Yeah.
Now pediatric doctors might be the exception. They don't need a lab, but general practices is definitely, not enough storage and not a large enough lab. Actually with the adoption of digital equipment, lab needs have gotten larger, and the cost of this in-house manufacturing, like 3D printers and CAD CAM mills, they're coming down like the technology does over time, to where it's become more adept for practices to want to plan and future proof their designs. So my advice to anybody would be to not neglect those two areas and make sure you're future proofed. Although you think 3D printing is not in your wheelhouse in the next 5 years, well, you're going to spend a lot of money building out this space. So let's make sure you're planned for the next 30.
Yeah, that's super smart. So talk to me about storage. So when you say storage, like what are some things, like what do you guys do for storage that's creative?
So storage needs are going to change based off size of the practice, of course, but every practice should have centralized sterilization and inventory management, meaning you've got a dirty to processing run and you have damn near an equal sized clean storage run that stores all your instruments, all your supply setups that go on a tray to deliver to a procedure. In equipment, we talk about a lot about delivery systems of handpieces and suction going to the oral cavity. Think of your sterilization with your central storage cabinetry across from it, being your delivery unit for all of the operatories. So it should be centrally placed for the ops, and it should be able to store all of your supplies. I mean, really, I still want a bulk storage closet, a dark closet you just shut the door on. And that's really just for storage of bulk dry goods like paper towels, toilet paper, cups, glove boxes you bought in bulk, or just boxes that you haven't had time to open and put in your supply cabinet yet.
Halloween decorations. Don't forget about that. Christmas decorations.
Especially your pediatric and ortho offices. I just did some yesterday. I'm like, yes, you need a complete closet for holiday.
Yeah. My wife the other day brought a whole bunch of stuff home from her office. I'm like, where do you want to put all this like stuff? And she's like, well, we don't have room in the office. I'm like, well, I don't want it in the house either.
Right.
but like, what are you going to do? You got to put it somewhere, it's got to be stored somewhere. So
yes, those things are important to think through. And a lot of times when you're making, when you're looking at how tight things might already be, it might, be hard for you to give space to a closet, but it will be, it will be needed, or it'll end up in your home.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Exactly. So, okay, let's talk technology. So, I mean, everyone talks about AI, of course, right? And that's been like an incredible, rise in dentistry, especially with, on the clinical side, AI has definitely taken some steps. But from a design perspective, Kevin, how do you incorporate technology in terms of what you're doing? Like, what are some technologies, I guess, that the doctors want to have now that maybe a few years ago they weren't having? How are you designing around that?
Yeah, well, so one thing, CBCT has become arguably standard of care. There's some pediatric doctors that might not be focused on the airway segment and things like that I still think a 2D pan is prevalent. But, CBCT, alcove, I've done relocation projects and things like that where they're like, oh, I don't have one now. But we should absolutely be planning for it.
Right.
Because in dentistry, it's a fact that you can't treat what you can't see. And CBCT being implemented in your practice, we usually see an uptick of about 25 to 35% in incidental findings. So making sure a CBCT alcove is planned for. And one of the recent trends technology wise that, we weren't, when I started, just over 10 years ago, like we weren't, there wasn't much of a discussion behind that is now like I'm making sure everybody's planned for is 3D, in-house 3D printing and potential of milling down the road. Most DSO practices that our associate doctors coming out of, most DSOs have adopted CAD CAM and in-office milling. So a lot of them are coming out already used to it. And then 3D printers. You can get a 3D printer now for like $10K. But it takes up some real estate that we have to plan for in the lab.
Yeah. They're like this big.
Yeah. And there's 3 stations, right? So you have 3 of this big. You got the printer, the wash, and the cure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There was, I feel like someone's got to develop something that's, does all 3 in a smaller piece of real estate. But yeah, right now you're exactly right. They're pretty big devices.
Yeah.
So,
and I want to touch on your AI subject too. This isn't, that's a software technology that's come out. And from a design planning standpoint, you're like, what does that have to do with my design? But I think monitor, placement in operatories can really make a huge difference for an office, especially a startup trying to build, trust with their new patients that have showed up at this new location. Having appropriately placed monitors that you're able to sit, chair side with with the patient and walk through whether what Pearl found on your co-diagnosis or intraoral camera images that you want to show and walk them through. Appropriate monitor placement so you can keep up with technologies that come out and effectively communicate with your patients what needs to be done. Very important to be thought about when designing and planning your equipment for the office.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. This is totally an aside, but I had a doctor who was buying a practice actually, and she went to the office, was about to submit an offer. She sat down in the chair and complained basically, to the owner that the design of the monitor was so old school that she would have to like torque her whole waist to be able to see it. And so her point was like, she wanted some credit on the sale to be able to install, the monitor somewhere where it was a little bit easier for the patient to see. But it's interesting that you bring that up because I had never even thought about that. But you're right. I mean, if you're bringing in lasers and other diagnostic tools, you want the patient to be able to comfortably see that, and where that monitor goes in the design of the whole operatory is super important because you don't want them to hit their head. You don't want it to be in their way, all those things.
It's funny. I see that in acquisitions so often because they were filmed back in the day, right? So
yeah,
at some point, this practice was already designed. It was a film-based practice, putting charts in the back. And then one day they adopted monitors, but they're like, where am I going to put this? How am I going to use it? And it was like, let's put it right by me for charting. And then you're right. As they started showing x-rays and things like that came out over time, you're cranking the patient like this to show what you need. But sometimes it can't just be like a 65-inch TV on the toe wall. Usually they're like 30 to 40. Right. But you can't be that because you have floor to ceiling windows, right? So you need an equipment rep to help walk you through of how are we going to present treatment to the patient in here. And I'm not talking just playing Netflix. Like, how are we going to walk through treatment when the patient's in the upright position? So, if we have windows, we got to go to the chair with our monitor mount, or can we go to the ceiling? Yeah.
I'm sure there's data about this somewhere, but I would love to know like what percentage of patients accept the treatment plans when they see visually, the cavity or the problem area or whatever, whether it's on a scan or whatever. I mean, it's got to be like astronomical, right? Like, how could you look at your tooth and see a black spot and not be like, yeah, let's take care of that?
Absolutely. Yeah, having that right in front of them and having a conversation about it is very important. Also, camera images. There's a hilarious stand-up comedian bit that they did on a dental practice, popped up on my Instagram, that was like, why did dentists expect me to know what that periapical x-ray means to me? But it's so important to walk through and educate them. And that is things where AI tools that help with caries detection can even further, help communicate in the mind of the patient of what is needed, but also having additional technology like being able to take a camera image, because a HD camera image is going to speak volumes to a patient immediately without any education compared to a periapical x-ray.
Yeah. See, this is how I know you're an equipment geek, because your Instagram pops up with dental stand-up comedy. I know, right? I love it. That's right. Okay, so all right, let's talk about pricing and budget for a second, right? Because that has really gotten like out of control. When my wife did her first office, right, she paid not for equipment, but just for the build out. It was $97 a square foot. And I think you saw her office. It was very nicely built pedo practice.
What year was that?
This was Emmy was just born. So 2009. Wow. 2009. Wow. Yeah. So 2000.
Buckle up, listeners.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So then 10 years ago, actually, in 2015, so we're talking 6-7 years after she opened up her first, we had to move to the second office, right? And there it was like 120 something, like almost $130 a foot, right? I am hearing numbers right now that, like you said, are people are going to be shocked about. From 2015 to today, I'm hearing numbers that are like 200, 225, 250 a foot just for the build out. Is that correct, Kevin?
That's accurate for startup. I mean, in you get into relocation projects where doctors want nicer finishes, they're ready to build just the most beautiful thing. And in the Bay Area, you can get up to 300 a square foot for that. But I would say most our startups in Northern California and the Bay Area are somewhere between that 200 to 250 a square foot mark. And everybody should know, because I know you have a wide audience, that changes based off geography. But I can tell you the numbers work, and we're still getting it done in the bank allocation and a startup loan. You are right, from that '08 to where we are now. I mean, it's gone way up.
It's increased crazy amount. And that's why I bring it up, because I think people talk to others and they hear these lower numbers and then they think that things haven't changed, but things have changed. And you're exactly right. Geography does make a huge difference. Like if you're in Seattle, it's not 200, 250. It's like 500.
Yeah,
it's
insane.
Western, like Washington is like crazy in the upper Northwest, but in a lot of California, a lot of the coastal states, I actually even have seen it in Texas, where it's like approaching like $150, $175 a foot now, where it was like 100 or below still up until like just a few years ago. But the point is that that's just for the construction, and then there's the equipment, right? And what would you say that they should allocate for the equipment per square foot? Is it another 100, 150?
Really, what I tell clients is like, your working capital is already set aside. So your construction budget is your construction budget, right? It is what it is. You got to get the space built. And the beauty of working with a full service distributor like Henry Schein, and why I like being on the distribution side, is ultimately I want to just be your partner on the project. I have manufacturers that are made in China, 10K operatories, and I've got great bang for your buck value packages that are 30 to 35K operatories. And then we have an upper echelon as well. So the point is you've got to get your construction done, and then we can work within whatever budget is left over. Now, hopefully I can find a happy medium between, the equipment you actually want, and you're not forced to go to that made in China, type of brand, if that's not your vision. But, what I see on average right now in allocation that's left over for equipment for startup practices is about 175 to 225. So 175,000 to 225,000 for our typical startup practice. And most our startups are designing for 4 to 6 operatories, but they're only equipping 2 initially. Maybe 3 if you're a pediatric, because you want 2 open bay to feed that, 1 restorative room. But on average, our startup practices are only equipping 2 ops initially. And just a piece on to finish our thought on that construction number and how it changes by geography. Construction numbers also change based off how busy the contractor is. Our referring partners, they're never going to turn us down from an introduction, but sometimes their busyness will be reflected in the price, or their disdain for where that doctor is located and how the parking is there for their subs. So it is so important to use this test fit initial design plan that, we are doing for our clients as they're, looking at spaces, to get some initial construction estimates and start interviewing contractors, because while they might be telling like myself or you, like, I'm down to do this project, their pricing might reflect that location is kind of a pain in the ass, and they don't have a lot of parking. So it's very important to get, 2 or 3 bids from 2, qualified dental specific contractors.
Yeah, that's a great point. And a couple of very important things about that. One is that the good news is that the banks have increased their budgets, so they're giving you more lending at better interest rates so that you can afford these bigger construction prices, because the reality is that prices of things have gone up. So don't worry about that side of it. And their loans are, there's only a couple of banks now that are doing startup loans anyways, and they're doing it really well, where there's 10, 12, sometimes 15-year term. So it's a little bit longer that allows you to do it. But I do want to talk about that increased pricing from the contractors, because you're exactly right. If the location's hard, right, their pricing might go up. if your architect is a difficult architect for them to work with,
Yes.
their pricing will go up. It's called a pain in the ass premium that they're going to charge. And there are definitely some people who are really a pain in the ass. And so the contractors will charge more. So that's where I think it's important to, if you are thinking about doing a startup, that you reach out to your equipment specialist. If you're in the Bay Area, of course, touch base with Kevin. And what he can tell you is, hey, this person is someone who is late all the time, or this person is someone that people enjoy working with. Those kinds of tidbits makes a big difference in terms of how the project gets done, how efficiently it gets done, and whether it gets done on, under budget or at least on budget.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about architect. I know I've talked a lot about design, but by no means are we replacing your architect on board. They are the professionals. Now, I collaborate with architects to make sure that things like that storage, sterilization, lab, operatory sizes based off what you want, based off the type of equipment you want and the layout and where hand pieces are coming from makes sense, the sizes of them, but you definitely still need an architect to go pull the building permit for you. I just want to mention that because shout out to my architects out there. They do an amazing job, but it is great to lead with this test fit design plan because again, form follows function, right? And we can use that test fit design plan to start building our team, get initial construction estimates, because circling back to a major pitfall we see offices have is they start piecing together their team after the lease is signed. So instead of using that lease negotiation period to get close to a finished design plan, construction bids, choose what contractor you want to go with, what architect, interior designer, having that a team assembled to where when the lease is signed, they're all ready to hit the ground running for you will save you potentially 6 months.
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, I try to time our lease edits and things with the swinging of hammers, right? And what I mean by that is as soon as you sign the lease, I want hammers to be swinging and construction to begin as soon as possible, because there's only so much free rent that we can negotiate from these landlords. And you're exactly right. And I want everyone to know this. It's so important that you talk to your equipment specialist about the architects, because Kevin's right. The architect needs to be part of the conversation in order to submit plans. But there's two ways of doing this, right? You can either hire a contractor that has an architect in-house. That's called a design build, contractor, I guess. They'll take Kevin's design and then, they'll put their spin and whatnot on it, and then they'll stamp it and submit it. Or you can go to an architect that's separate from the contractor to do the whole set of plans. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you got to know the timing of it. And that's where your equipment specialist comes into play, because there are some architects, I should say, that will take 6 weeks just to submit the most basic of plans.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got, let's say 4 months of free rent and you just lost 6 of 24 weeks, that's a hard place to be. That's a hard place to be. So for everyone who's listening, rely on your equipment specialist for their advice on who's available, who's good, and who can do it, in a timely way.
And on budget, for sure.
And on budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, on budget. Okay, let's talk about the next thing before we go to the next segment, which is, I think, a misnomer for some folks, which is some people think that doing a renovation is going to be necessarily cheaper than doing a new office.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's say I want to do a renovation, right? Let's take the easy one, which is I found an old office and I want to renovate it as opposed to, doing one from scratch. Is it necessarily cheaper, Kevin?
Does the old office have patience? So this is an acquisition doctor that's like, yes, and I'm going to
Let's say they don't. Let's say they don't.
They don't have patience.
Well, no patience, yeah.
Think about it like this way. If you're keeping the bones where it's at, yes, it'll be cheaper and it'll be easier. But this practice might have been designed 30 years ago. So you need to make sure the bones work for you. You need to make sure, if it's empty, have an equipment specialist come out there, lay out some full-size templates and make sure that the bones work for you, that the operatory sizes, the space you're going to have around the chair work. Because if the bones work, yes, it does save you time. It will save you expense that you can reallocate elsewhere or just save, because we call that a lipstick upgrade. You're going to go in there, throw new floors down, paint, new ceiling tiles, new furniture. But if you're gonna move bones, now you're into a whole building permit situation and you're demoing it because you can do a lipstick upgrade without permits. You can paint floors and do a refresh. But as soon as you start moving walls, moving plumbing, you need to go get a building permit. A contractor won't work on that without a building permit. And that now you're through the whole process anyways.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, I think, Kevin, you mentioned it briefly too, is, the old office might not have been ADA compliant. Now you need to be ADA compliant. So the hallways may be too narrow. The doorways may be too narrow. There may not be room for, a wheelchair to come into at least one of the operatories. I mean, there's a lot of these little things. So you got to just be aware that renovations can be cheaper sometimes, but they can also cost more if you're moving things around. So again, important to get your equipment specialist sort of involved early. Now, let's talk about Kevin, have you done offices where someone's like in practice and now they want to add like 2 to 3 rooms, next door? Like how do you handle that process?
So glad you went into this because I thought it was important to touch on before we moved on because
Yep.
4 or 5 times a year, I meet with a doctor that is newly acquired an office and they're like, it's not working for me, but I bought this practice because I knew I could renovate. And it's like, well, tell me about that. What do you want to do to this office? Well, I don't have enough space in my operatories and I want to take the shared cabinet walls out and I want to do walls instead. Yeah. Well, now I have to be the bearer of bad news that type of large renovation in an existing office requires a permit, which triggers the ADA and all that. All the permitting can take place while you still practice. But the real kicker, Ollie, is when you get the building permit and it's time to renovate, where are you going to go for those 2 to 3 months while the office is gutted and remodeled the way that you want it? So a lot of times, what we end up seeing is those newly acquired doctors, they deal with it. 3 to 5 years, hopefully grow their asset that they just purchased, and then they buy a building, renovate it, equip, design it to handle more operatories, and then they relocate that practice with no downtime except maybe the week that it took you to relocate to your new building that you now own. So but there is situations where, you've bought a practice and your staff can eat outside because you live in California, the weather's great, and you're not touching your existing rooms. All you're doing is moving dental plumbing to that staff lounge. There are situations where that's really easy and quick to do. So yeah, everything's situational, but I do always see so often somebody buy a practice on the pretense that they're like, I'm just going to get in here, work for a few months, and then I'll renovate things. And they didn't realize, where am I going to go practice and see these patients that I need to see while these renovations take place.
I think, that's such an important point. I think in 20 years, I've maybe seen 5, maybe 6 offices where they truly were going to the space next door and were able to build out that space without interrupting their office at all. And then over maybe a holiday 2-week period, they basically opened up the wall and then merge the 2 offices together,
those type of situations are ideal. Like you don't want to touch the interior until that adjacent space is built out, and then you just move the practice over to there, renovate this side. That doubles the amount of time you're under construction, but at least you weren't canceling patients. So if we're talking about expansions into adjacent spaces, it's great. We call that a phased remodel where you build that out, move over, and then remodel this and open it up in between with no downtime.
Yeah. So, okay, great. All right, let's go to the next section, which is the Ask Ali segment. This is the part where we've gotten questions from the audience, and then we're going to be asking you. So you ready for this, Kevin?
Yes.
Let's do it. Okay. It says, Ali, I just bought an existing practice and inherited equipment that's 15 plus years old. Everyone's telling me to immediately upgrade to new chairs, cabinetry, and digital tech, but I'm already stretched thin from the acquisition loan. From both a financial and practical perspective, how do I know which upgrades are urgent versus what can wait? Oh, that's a really good question, actually. This is a common question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say cabinets immediately take off the table, right? Like your cabinets aren't affecting your ability to see a patient. Granted, it might be
Yeah.
pushing on you a little, like if it's pushing on you and making it hard to work and you have musculoskeletal issues that are, it's making it hard to work for you. Okay, we need to demo that cabinet, but you don't necessarily need to buy a new one. Maybe we just need to create space. But I would say first off, like let's address what is preventing me from doing dentistry. So if those 15-year-old operatories are constantly needing to be repaired, which is causing you to have to move a column of patients to another room, then yeah, we have to address the chair first that's giving you the problems that's causing you to cancel patients. So I would treat it like a triage, like what is preventing me from seeing patients because it's broken, and let's fix that. And then, working with a distributor such as Shine, okay, we just bought a practice, what type of models of equipment do you have a local showroom that I can go look at that can hit the budget that I'm looking for?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Yeah. And I think everyone wants the new stuff, like the new chairs, new technology, new everything. But it's like you said, it's got to be done like a triage, like what's not working, what's impacting you from having the revenue and doing the things you need to do from a production perspective, and then work backwards from there. And the nice thing is for the person who asked this question, once you're in practice, you've got cash flow. So you can start setting aside a piece of your profit every month and say, okay, I'm going to allocate this to new chairs, or I'm going to reupholster the chairs and buy more lasers and CBCT machine and all the other stuff that you can do. And then you deal with the chairs later, if they get broke, if they break. So I think there's a whole strategy behind that.
Agreed. And most acquisitions, we're involved on the very front end is doing an equipment inspection. Like they want to know after all the numbers and chart reviews and all that takes place, they want to know like, hey, can I get in here and see patients with this dental equipment? And it's so important before you close on the practice to, pay to have a technician, from an equipment dealer come out and do a thorough inspection of everything. So, like, okay, hey, I need new syringes in this room or that room. The handpiece doesn't run at all. What am I going to do? Let's start negotiating about it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I love that. Okay, this next question is kind of long, but I'm going to cut it down a little bit. Okay, so it says, Ali, I'm a new grad and planning a scratch startup. I was shown different designs and equipment packages, but the costs are overwhelming. Everyone keeps telling me to future-proof my office. And then it kind of keeps going on, but I'm going to just stop there and ask you a specific question. If there's one piece of technology for future-proofing, Kevin, right, that you're like, every startup should have this in their office, outside of the normal practice management software and all, what would that one piece of equipment be that you're like, everyone needs to have it?
For a startup, an intraoral camera, for sure. Pictures speak volumes to patients. And whether you're a startup or existing practice, there's camera prices on all ends of the range, but there should be a camera easily accessible in every single room. You can get lower budget cameras if equipping every single room is becoming a financial challenge. But that camera is such an important piece of technology day one for a startup to have. From a design perspective, yes, you plan cabinetry space for that 3D printer, the mill. Scanners are all either wireless or they roll in on laptops nowadays. So that, part is not so necessary day one if you're already at your max limit on budget. But from pieces of technology that I recommend day one is for sure a camera to help you communicate. Of course, you're going to have a digital sensor, right? But that camera would be considered an add-on technology that I think is so vital for a startup practice.
Awesome. Cool.
And if and I would say to that client, because they said the numbers are overwhelming. Well, you should have an equipment vendor that you can have a transparent conversation with that about that can take you down to the next model. Because when you're saying overwhelming, that tells me you're tens of thousands of dollars off. So it's not a matter of how do I get this model for less money at that point. It's I need to work with a qualified vendor that can take me to the next manufacturer that's going to still achieve my goals, but now hit the price point that I'm looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the one thing I would say to that point, and we'll end this segment on this, I think is something I've learned with my wife's practices, but with countless clients too, which is if you don't feel comfortable communicating and having honest conversations with your equipment specialist, you need to change. you need to change. You need to have an honest conversation where there's trust. And the reason is that if you don't do that, you're going to start piecemealing. And that is the biggest mistake. Pick an equipment specialist and go with that company for everything that they sell. And the reason is that if God forbid something does go wrong, which sometimes it does, right? There's
just like construction, yeah, things go.
Yeah, exactly. You know who to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Kevin, there's something going on. Can you come take a look?" And Kevin or one of his, counterparts will be there in a heartbeat because they know they did the entire office. Trying to piecemeal it. Oh, I'm going to buy these 3 things here and those 2 things over there, and it just causes so many problems.
And it's going to take you away from the dental chair producing revenue, right? I think Henry Schein has a wonderful slogan of, let us take care of the practice care so you can focus on patient care. And it's so important what you mentioned about being able to trust your equipment vendor, because it's not just helping you select equipment. We've talked a little bit on the front end of the design, but where the work really begins is you've ordered your equipment, and now we're producing our specification plans and collaborating with the architect on helping fast track you getting that building permit. And now we're in construction, and your equipment vendor is equipment rep you're working with is the one that's on site saying, hey, we have post-tension slab underground work and the air and vacuum plumbing's got to move. Where should we move it to? Having an equipment rep you trust that's responsive will greatly decrease the stress involved with you in the practice, but speed up the timeline of things. So if you're unsure on your equipment rep, but you found a good architect, attorney, contractor, ask them about who they like working with, and they'll guide you to the right person, because it's so important. As you mentioned, we're involved long after the sale and installation of the equipment should things need adjusting down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely are. You've proven that over and over again. All right, the last segment, which is plead the fifth. So we're going to ask you a spicy topic, and then you have 2 choices. You could answer honestly or just plead the fifth, which of course no one has done so far. And it was funny when when we started, you were like, do people know what question you're going to ask? No, people do not know what questions we're going to ask. So that's what makes it spicy.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
We know you're not this way because we've been working together for so long, but the industry definitely gets criticized for pushing the most expensive packages when somebody's doing a startup. And the question really comes down to, is that really needed, right? Is that really needed? Now, in your experience, why do you think that attitude exists? And then more importantly, have you seen examples where someone has invested for a higher end product that, maybe was a little bit out of their budget initially and it's paid off dividends down the road? Or have you looked at that and been like, oh, they could have bought 3 of those lasers for the price of that one that they bought, so they might as well have just chosen the cheaper model. What? Walk me through that.
So I'll address the first part. I think that the industry, unfortunately, has a lot of transactional equipment salespeople that are thinking, how can I get the most chairs at the most dollar value in this install? And they're not thinking long term, so beware a run of somebody that's pushing, one product on you. And definitely as a startup, if they're telling you to equip all the rooms because you're going to get the best deal, run. That person doesn't have a vested interest in the long-term relationship of that. And sometimes equipment only companies can be like that too, because they have no vested interest at the back end of wanting to work with you on supplies like Henry Schein does. So there's so much accountability behind of wanting to make sure you have a positive experience with us. And there's transactional salespeople out there. There's transactional dentists out there. You're going to have to do your work on the front end to make sure that person has your best interests at heart, because, we should be showing you options. We should be learning about your goals, what you clinically want to do long term, and then recommend a couple options for you and be willing to show you a couple options or offices that they've done with the options you're considering. And then the second part there, have I seen somebody spend more than they were comfortable spending. Me personally, no, because if somebody's telling me this is my budget, I'm going to respect that unless I'm getting the feeling that like they want to go beyond their budget for a specific product. But no, I mean, me personally, no, like I take pride in working within somebody's budget. I'm here for the long term. So you got to do it when it makes sense for you. Things like CAD CAM, lasers, you have to evaluate your practice. And when you're doing an appropriate amount of crowns or you're seeing an appropriate amount of soft tissue type procedures, or there's multiple quadrant dentistry you could be doing with the laser, then you evaluate putting in the tech, but you have to make sure that the ROI analysis is done before spending your load on a heavy piece of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a telltale sign. If you're listening today and your equipment specialist is talking to you about, any of these pieces of equipment that Kevin just mentioned that are great technologies for down the road, but they're pushing you up front, or doing any of the things that Kevin just mentioned, just take note of that and run, right? and run and go from there.
Dentists, right? This is startups. This common for the people that are tuning in. They're building their dream office for a relocation. Like that's you have existing patients. It's a different conversation.
Totally different story. Yeah.
100%, Ali. If they are pushing that, then maybe it's time to evaluate. Ask other people on your team, like your contractor or attorney. What other vendor can I have a interview with?
So Kevin, thank you for sharing all this. This has been awesome. Figuring out when to upgrade equipment, how to do the design, all these tidbits, super, super valuable. Tell the audience, I know you've got a territory here in the Bay Area. Give us sort of a little bit of the geography of where you work so that if they want to do a startup, they can reach out to you here in the Bay.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't shy away based off where you're at. We're well connected. The dental industry is small. So if you want to reach out to me, you can follow my Instagram to see practices that I've done. It's a great way and it can help you pin ideas of office designs you like. It's design equip DDS_Kevin. And I'll get you to an equipment vendor in that market. And if there's not somebody that I know and trust, I'll find somebody in a contact for you. But the coverage that I do is the Bay Area. I'm based in Bay Area, Northern California.
Awesome. So you go all the way down to Monterey and Carmel, right?
Yeah.
And east towards like Stockton as well. I think that's probably the furthest.
Yeah,
you go,
up to the Brentwood area and Ukiah, way up north.
Perfect.
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. If you've enjoyed this episode, please, do us a favor and like it, comment on it, subscribe to Ali Off the Record. But Kevin, thank you again. All of Kevin's information is down below in the description and comments. So feel free to reach out to him if you're doing a project in the Bay Area. And like he said, if you are doing something outside of the Bay Area and you want some recommendations, just reach out to us, reach out to Kevin, and we'll get you to the right person. All right, everyone.
Thanks for having me, Ali. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin. Bye.
Bye.